Hello, welcome to the interview here on France 24. Well, when terrorists crashed commercial airliners into New York's World Trade Center on September 11th, 2001, America's top intelligence agencies had plenty of people trained in the language of Cold War spydom, Russian. But what the CIA sorely lacked at the time of the worst terrorist attack on U.S. soil were the Arabic, Pashto, Urdu, and Farsi speakers needed to analyze data, talk to locals, translate intelligence in a 21st century world of new threats. Now, more than a decade later, the nature of terrorism itself, the players, the places, their methods, remains a moving target. As global jihad gives way to more locally focused offshoots of al-Qaeda from Iraq to Somalia to Syria, those entrusted with keeping the United States safe are constantly rethinking their counterterrorism strategies with an eye on tomorrow's threats. Now, my guest today is Matthew Levitt. Welcome to our studios.
Thanks for having me.
You are a director of counterterrorism and intelligence at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, based in Washington. You're a former senior official in the U.S. Treasury Department, and you were sort of charged with trying to keep terrorists from being able to raise the cash they needed to threaten U.S. national security interests. You've also worked as an advisor to the State Department, to the FBI, on counterterrorism intelligence strategy. I think your credentials are clear. You know your stuff when it comes to counterintelligence and intelligence counterterrorism. I'd like to start with far from the U.S. home front, far from the homeland front, in Syria. Because Syria is a place which today a lot of people recognize as perhaps one of the growing and rising biggest hotbeds of extremism and jihad. And you were telling me actually before the show that the pace at which foreign fighters, foreign jihadists are being radicalized is growing faster and faster.
That's right, Douglas. Look, when I started my career at the FBI, my last assignment was leading the analytical team for Flight 175, the second flight at the Trade Center. It's a long time since then. Today, the epicenter for international jihadi activity is not in Afghanistan or Pakistan, it's in Syria. That's a lot closer to Europe's borders. Its ability to travel to Syria is infinitely easier. You can go there in just a few hours. You have people who've been radicalized and who are going from Europe into Syria on their spring vacation from college for 14, 15, 16 days. And there's a proliferation of groups on the ground there. It's not just the al-Qaeda core that we knew at 9/11. It's not even just the al-Qaeda affiliates, Jabhat al-Nusra, or the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, Daesh, but it's Ahrar al-Sham, it's a whole bunch of other groups. There are dozens and dozens of groups on the ground in Syria.
Give us a sense of the numbers. Are we exaggerating the threat when people say they're streaming into Syria from all points, north, south, east, and west? How many foreign fighters are there right now? Where are they mostly coming from?
There are several thousand foreign fighters in Syria right now. Most of them, they're coming from a variety of different places, and you can basically divide them into two sides, those fighting on the Sunni side and those fighting on the Shia side on behalf of the regime together with Iran and Hezbollah. And they're about equal. If you count the number of people from Lebanon, mostly Hezbollah, and the Iraqi Shia militants, and a smattering of other Shias from everywhere from Cote d'Ivoire to Bahrain, Afghanistan, that's one side. The side that most people are focusing on, counterterrorism officials in the West, the United States and Europe are mostly focused on, is the Sunni side, and it's several thousand, 6,000, 7,000 people
from
total.
Here, from France in some cases.
French officials say it's about 700 people from France.
And what about the United States?
In the United States, we've had fewer people. We have had at least 70. I'm told that that's probably a low ball figure, but it's the highest public figure that I've seen. We have a different situation in the United States. We're not as close to this as you are here in Europe. It is more of a thing to get there. It's more expensive. But this is something that we're very concerned about. The Director of National Intelligence in the United States recently testified that Jabhat al-Nusra is interested in Western, including American fighters, and they do aspire, was his words. They have an aspiration to carry out attacks in the West, including the U.S. homeland.
Given what you were telling me about the acceleration of this radicalization process, say you are a counterterrorism advisor in the U.S., in the government, where do you start to address this issue? How do you try to curb this or stem it before it has a chance to develop?
We need to be doing a bunch of things at once, some of which we're doing, some we're not doing at all. And the reason is this. It used to be if you wanted to radicalize someone to be al-Qaeda, fight with al-Qaeda, you had to radicalize them quite a ways along that path to go do some offensive jihad.
Right.
This, in the eyes of many, this fight in Syria is a defensive jihad. It's incumbent upon you to go and fight to defend innocent Syrians who are being butchered by the regime because no one else is, because Paris isn't going, and Washington isn't going, and London isn't going, and Sydney isn't going, Canberra isn't going, and so you need to go. This is a much easier pitch. It takes a much shorter period of time to make the pitch, so it's a shorter fuse. You have people who are being radicalized and are going within weeks, within 2 months.
Who's making the pitch?
Well, sometimes it's people in person, but most of the time, in my understanding here in Europe and in France in particular, the vast majority of the time, it's online. It's either self or homegrown radicalization, or it's someone who's directing you. And then the same, when you want to know how to get somewhere, social media is all you need. Facebook and other Twitter, other things, and you are in touch with someone. How did you get there? Which bus did you take? Which flight did you take? Which is the least expensive? And you can find your way to Syria and then to the southern border and cross into Turkey and cross into Syria.
Online, obviously, we're getting into the cyber debate and a lot of these, I guess, the NSA issues, because presumably this means that if you're in intelligence, you need to have a lot of agents monitoring these people, monitoring these networks constantly.
Look, there's a give and a take. On the one hand, there's an inclination to want to shut down some of these websites and chat rooms and Facebook pages. It's difficult, and if you do, they'll just pop up someplace else. But the other reason not to do it is because they do have an intelligence function. And so you do need people, and more to the point, because you're dealing with such volume, you need systems that are going to be able to track this material. The key is doing it in a way that balances those really honest, necessary international security needs with the equally honest, necessary privacy protections.
And here we're getting into the diplomatic slippery slope here. The Defense Secretary of U.S. Chuck Hagel, he recently said that there is quite a debate here. There's a fine line here. Where do you draw the line in this security versus civil liberties, given the nature of the threat that you have been talking about?
There's no way to answer that question straight up and down, and anybody who does is not being honest with you.
They're a liar.
There are yes, they are.
Yeah.
There are lots of different ways this is done, and each one of them has to be weighed. The one thing that's clear is you don't need a vacuum cleaner that sucks everything and so overloads the system that you can't find the stuff that's really important. What we need to do is have systems that identify what is important, focus on those areas, collect there, but the government doesn't need to know what every person is doing everywhere, and any program that is just sucking in everything can be so overwhelming in what it gives you in such massive amounts of data that it's not going to be particularly useful.
So would you say, from your vantage point, that the steps being taken right now by the U.S. government to sort of rein in slightly the NSA or the scope of its activities, are they measured?
This is just the beginning of a process. I applaud the effort to revisit how and what is being done. This is something that in a democracy like ours should be done from time to time. You may recall right after the Patriot Act was passed, it had all kinds of provisions that have since been dropped, like being able to look at what books people were taking out from the library. Turned out it wasn't useful at all. You don't need it. So we should be doing the same type of thing with this or other types of systems we have at our disposal as well, so that it can be done not only within the law, but in such a way that people have comfort that the system is doing what it's supposed to do and not things it shouldn't be doing.
Beyond the cyber issues here, I want to just mention Africa for a moment. Barack Obama, in his State of the Union, he singled out Africa, but specifically Somalia and Mali. And sitting here in France right now, Mali seems to be a place where the U.S. has taken that lead from behind approach, outsourcing it to the French, saying they seem to be doing a good job taking on the terrorist threat there. Do you agree with that stance?
Look, the Obama administration clearly has a desire not only to end the wars that the United States is in, but to support others where it can. The U.S. need not be doing everything as the primary actor in all places in the world. So France had an interest, France had the capabilities, and the United States played critical support, air support in particular.
The lead from behind is...
Well, the French soldiers couldn't have gotten there without the U.S. support to get them there. Some would describe this as leading from behind. That's all well and good. In this situation, it worked out quite nicely. In Syria, it's not working out nicely at all. And nobody is leading. And we're having a situation where the international community's response to this incredible travesty, this humanitarian catastrophe, is only putting Band-Aids on the humanitarian problem. Nobody is doing anything to end the conflict, to take on the al-Qaeda elements on one side or the regime on the other. And getting back to where we were talking a minute ago, this contributes to the radicalization problem. Because no one else is going to deal with the Assad regime, therefore you or I must go.
So in other words, we have a tiny bit of time briefly. It would seem that you would favor a more muscular, a more assertive policy, U.S. policy, especially with regards to helping the opposition, very briefly.
Not just the United States. The international community needs to do more. I think the United States definitely has a big role to play in that. But if we don't, this humanitarian catastrophe with about 140,000 dead and several million displaced is going to get much, much worse. And will have all kinds of horrible implications, not only from a humanitarian perspective, not only from a terrorism and security perspective, but in terms of the regional spillover overall. This could be something we'll be dealing with for a decade.
And I presume eventually regional, not just Europe, but potential threat also to the United States, to the homeland itself.
Yes.
Matthew Levitt, we've run out of time, but thank you very much. You are the Director of Counterterrorism and Intelligence, if I could get that out of my mouth, at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. And we've been talking about the sort of ever-changing efforts to develop counterterrorism strategy in this 21st century world, and especially with respect to Syria. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks, Douglas. Pleasure.
And thanks to all of you for watching the interview here on False Venkat.